Hello and welcome to Just Draw, Just Paint Part 2. Today we are doing some landscape sketching and drawing and painting. So what you see before you is quite a simple brief. Top left corner you can see some ancient ruins, floating islands, mystical fog, ancient artifacts, design inspiration from Mayan civilization, time of day is dawn, and the feel is mysterious. So I typically start this way. I just draw out a couple frames, some basic layouts for ideation, looking for flow, looking for overlap, all the fundamental stuff that we cover at our school. And I'm looking for something that stands out to me or something that I'd like to pursue a little bit further. But remember that this entire series is just for us, right? It is a series in just drawing, just painting, right? Having fun, just doing something wacky with a little brief, just getting stuck in painting, drawing. Again, this is the kind of stuff I like to do once a week at least, to just kind of loosen up and try and get into the flow of art, because oftentimes I am mentoring other artists so much that I almost never get to work on my own stuff. So this is kind of like an exercise for me to just enjoy the process. Here I'm just drawing over some of the frames, trying to look for a little bit more clarity in terms of form and ideas. So we started super loose and now I'm getting a little bit tighter, which brings me to the thing I actually want to talk about this week with you guys, which is this idea that art, ultimately, no matter what we do, is an exploration, right? So we're given a task and we become the investigators towards its completion. So this is a very important concept, one I like to give to my mentees as well, which is try not to tighten up when you're producing art. Especially in the early phases, it can be really detrimental to your process. And a really great way to think about this, the sort of mantra that I use, is work big before you work in detail and work dirty before you work clean. So as you can see, the work I'm producing right now, super gross, right? Super dirty. If I did this while I was on the phone, you'd believe it, right? Because I'm just scribbling. So you can do this on a post-it note. You could do this in a sketchbook, What I'm doing here is the original form of sketching, right? It's not that high-end, hyper-rendered, perfect art that you guys see. Everyone says, oh, look at my sketchbook. It's this perfect piece of art. It's the most unrealistic sketchbook in the world, right? Sketchbook should be sketchy, right? It should just be ideas. And so here, when it comes to things like concept art, illustration, this is the kind of preliminary work that we often do, which is just sketching on ideas, right? Like finding the image before we commit to it. And in this way, we kind of take the stress of producing artwork off our shoulders, because it's totally okay if we screw up at any point here, right? Because none of this is written in stone, right? It can just be, well, we're going to figure it out along the way, or this is working, that's not working. And ultimately, what I like to do with things like this is I'll take the best elements and ideas that I sketched out from each of these and combine them into a final image that I'll then work into. And in that way, I like to think that I'm borrowing the best ideas that I had at the time of sketching. And so sketching for me is an exploration, right? It is the idea of me working really, really loose and really, really big in terms of concept. It's like if something can read as a graphic at a very far distance and at a very simple level, it becomes iconic. And in that way, if I complicate it or if I add detail, it will just become better and better over time. So that's at least my theory. That's the way I like to work. This is how I've learned myself. This is the kind of information that I share with everyone. And it's the kind of information that I received when I was learning from my peers and from even my mentors. And so I think it's quite important to just develop this thinking habit, because when we start out with art, we tend to over detail too early and we get over committed to something too early. And when that happens, you're painting yourself into a corner and you're saying, well, I haven't got much room to move, right? I can barely breathe where I am, and the colors aren't working and the values aren't working and something's not quite right and I'm not sure what it is. And now that I have it down, well, maybe I should finish it. And then you sort of get demoralized because you don't know where to take it. Whereas if you start with a process where you're keeping it loose and you're exploring, you're having fun, so many artists actually consider the sketch phase to be the most fun that they have in an artwork. I mean, this comes from all walks of life. I mean, this is illustrators, designers. It's always those early exciting phases that we get inspired through. And we always say like, well, what is the design? What are we looking for? How could it look? And this sort of time and experience is not often afforded to some of the younger aspiring artists within the industry. Here you can see I've just finished up these thumbnails, and so I'm now going to extract all of them into a single thumbnail. And what I've done above is come up with a simple color palette based on some paintings that I really like. And now I'm actually working a multiplier layer underneath everything. In fact, it's not even a multiplier layer. The multiplier layer is the line art. And here I'm just laying in the colors in the right ratio. So I'm separating my foreground, middle ground, background, the sky, the island that's floating. And I've got a sketch that has enough depth and enough visual interest for me to take forward. Now, you may be watching this and going like, I have no idea what's going on. It just looks like a bunch of dirt. Well, what I'm doing is I'm laying in paint essentially underneath the line art. I'm using the line art as a guide as to where to put values and where to put color that I have in my predestined palette. The cool thing about this is because it's digital, unlike traditional, is that those colors on my palette are not drying up. So I get to use them over and over again in whatever order I want. And this is, again, one of the great benefits of digital art is that we get to do this kind of stuff. We get to play around and push pixels around until we have something that starts to work. So at this stage, I'm also thinking about value read. You can see here, everything has really come together. I've kind of got the main structure of what should be here. So right now, I'm just putting in a tiny bit of detail before I'm going to get in and sort of render out everything else. But I do want to finish up my thought that I was having earlier, which is this idea of sketching before you commit, right? And you can see here how loose and big the brushstrokes I'm making are in this painting. I'm not committing to drawing characters or little bushes or blades of grass or anything like that. I'm working really big before I work small. And this is exactly how we teach at the school, right? Is we try work ideas, and painting and detail and characters and everything works in the same order, right? From big to small, from dirty to clean. And I often say, try get something on the page before you have to start committing to something, because it's the hardest thing to do in art is to commit to something on a page, because we're staring at this blank canvas and it tends to be this monster that we just can't overcome and we get stuck. So I've laid in everything that should be in here as painting. So right now I'm just going to kind of build this up. I know what I want. I want a giant lava pool underneath this thing. I want it to look like it's extracted out of the ground and started floating on its own out of some magic. And once I get my basic layering down, I'm going to start working over this in great detail. So I'm spent a few hours on this actually. I normally take quite quick to get to this stage, which is the fastest phase, is to lay a painting in and get it working. But the longest part of the painting tends to be the end of the painting, where you start rendering in the details, right? So what I'm doing here is already starting to do that. I'm separating my elements. I'm thinking about the background, like what is it? What kind of flow do I want back there? What kind of mysticism? I'm thinking about the brief the whole time I'm doing this. So I'm thinking about what elements do I want where? How am I going to sell, whoever's looking at this into this idea that it is actually following the brief, right? So pretty soon, you're going to see me just go over this whole thing with a couple detail passes. And we're going to call it done after that. The detail passes, remember, just take me a lot longer. So I'm not going to record all that stuff, probably bore you guys to tears because it takes so many hours and I wouldn't want to speed up that kind of footage. I might in the future, but for now, I just want to remind you guys that today, right, is all about taking the stress out of art. It's about painting because it's fun. It's about experimenting. It's about just doing something, right? Picking some things and doing it. And once that is under your belt, it feels so good, right? You finished something, you've got something on your belt, you've been learning, right? You've put the work in to get better every single time. So here you can see very much focused on trying to drive the story of this floating island. I'm putting in a giant shadow for its base because obviously it's in the air, right? So if this is a dawn situation, we've got the sun coming from the side. I want the island to be hit by that sun and cast a very long shadow into the plains below. So what's really interesting is we have a very close foreground element in this image. You'll see as I finish up, I've got some nice foreground characters and stuff like that. And then where the island is, we have a very big jump from the midground to the background. And it's really cool because it's almost like a cliff in front of us. And then things get very, very small closer to the island. And then I start to build out what's up there and all that kind of stuff. So yeah. If you guys are curious about this process, you're more than welcome to ask me in the comments or send me an email or anything like that. I would also recommend you guys check out our newsletter. I'll mention it again a little bit later on when it comes up. There's a link at the bottom of the screen, but here I'm just turning on all the layers of me working over this painting and bringing in the detail. You can see foreground elements. You can see influence of Mayan civilization. You can see plants. You can see a globe. And that's basically it, right? A couple characters to sell us on the drama and working into the foreground and the midground and the background. And I'm going to call this one done, right? That for me is good enough right now. So I'm going to just blow it up on the screen here. And I'd like to remind you guys to like and subscribe. And remember, if you visit our site at 101artschool.com, you can sign up to our free newsletter. Thanks. And I'll check you guys next time.